I hope you had a good Christmas and New Year's. And I ran into the UPS guy and I said, oh, did you have a good holiday and all that? And he said, I'm glad it's over. And it's a great time of year, isn't it? But it's often hectic and it's like, okay, get a little routine back in to our lives. So hopefully you had a great Christmas and a wonderful New Year. And we're back at it here this morning just to press into what God has for us. Last week, if you were here, we talked a little bit about recapture, looking back over the past year and not trying to edit God into our lives, not trying to figure out, well, where was he? But looking at his intervening moments into our lives and recapturing and remembering. And we looked through Deuteronomy 7, 8, and 9 a little bit, and all the times that God said to remember, he was asking them to remember his specific intervening, saving work in their lives. And so that's what we were seeking to do. I got an email from somebody this week, and they said, after last week I went and I took my calendar, because we write everything down that we do, and I just flipped through the calendar. And there were all these events and things that we were doing, and I was able to remember where we saw and experienced God's intervening work in our lives in the various things that we were a part of over the year. And I'm like, yes, that's it. That's what we want to do when we recapture. This week, we are going to talk about recalibrate so that we can step into 2015. A few months ago, we had a staff breakfast, and we'll do this occasionally as a staff team, and everybody will bring their specialty. So my specialty was this French toast that soaks overnight, and it's really gooey and good. But every staff person brings something. And Robert, who's on our facilities team, brought these cinnamon buns. Except he didn't cook them at home. He brought them in. He came in early and got the pan ready and all that, preheated the oven, put them in the oven. And when he came back, rather than having these delicious cinnamon buns, we had hockey pucks. And it isn't because Robert's a bad cook. It is because he put them in an oven that when he turned it to 350, it really wasn't 350 degrees. It wasn't calibrated properly. And so we didn't get to enjoy Robert's buns. I don't know. Robert, are you here this morning? Yep. All right. See, in the last service, I got to say, well, when you see Robert, tell him we enjoyed talking about his buns in service to them. Another place where calibration is extremely important is in the world of coffee. And if you like coffee, you want the perfect cup of coffee, you need some tools to create the perfect cup of coffee. Now, the perfect cup of coffee does begin with some pretty good beans and all that. And so you need good beans. But you need a grinder. See, now it depends on what kind of coffee machine you're using. This grinder is a burr grinder, and it will grind everything from really fine. So if you're doing espresso, you need a really fine coffee, all the way up to very coarse if you're using a percolator, and everything in between. But the grind makes a difference. What type of grind you grind your beans at makes a difference depending on what type of coffee brewer you are using. A couple of my favorites, the Chemex pot. So this is kind of a pour-over. Maybe some of you have one. Or the Kalita Wave, another kind of pour-over coffee. But these require a little more precision. And so when you're boiling your water, one of the things that's precise about the best cup of coffee is the temperature of the water. You need to have your water between 195 and 205 degrees for the best cup of coffee. See, if the water's not warm enough, it won't extract the best flavors out of your coffee. But if it's too hot, you're going to scald the beans. So you need to have the right temperature of water for the perfect cup of coffee. And of course, a wonderful pot like this enables you to do a nice circle motion. And the rate of pour over top of your beans, believe it or not, makes a big difference. So you got to pour it on, it fills up, then you got to wait. So there's patience involved in the best cup of coffee. And of course, and guess what? We are grinding our beans fresh on Sunday mornings now here at Hillside. So now the one thing, the benevolence fund went up $8,000. If we could do a little more on the coffee fund, we might be able to buy a little bit better whole beans, and then we could increase the great coffee here at Hillside. So, but we are now grinding our beans fresh here. But even in the best cup of coffee, calibration is important, isn't it? And same with our spiritual lives. Our spiritual lives oftentimes need to be recalibrated. And that's what we're going to do this morning, is to look at several parts of Scripture and let the Scriptures recalibrate. As I walk through these, what I want you to catch is the pattern. See, the Scriptures have patterns in them. So when you look at different parts of Scripture or talk about different parts of the Bible, there's patterns that begin to emerge. And it's the pattern that I'd like us to see as we seek to recalibrate our own lives this morning. We just got done with Christmas, right? What's Christmas all about? Christmas is about God sending his Son. God intervening into the affairs of man, God stepping towards us. Right? That's what Christmas is all about. That he came, that he bridged the gap and came towards us. And what do we do with that? What do we do with the fact that he came and intervened into our world? We have one thing we can do. We can either respond yes or we can respond no. He came, bridged the gap. Do we want him or don't we want him? God sending his Son was his initiating activity. And we have but one thing to do. It's to say yes to God's yes to us. When he sent his Son, he said yes to us. And we have to say yes to God's yes to us. And so he initiates, he came, and we respond. When you think about the great Christian mission that God left us, that Jesus left us in Matthew 28, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, go into all the world and tell people about me. Teach them to obey all that I've commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. The great Christian mission. He gives us something to do. But is that an initiating activity or a responding activity for us? See, if you think about it closely, when God sent his Son, we have to respond to him. God sent his Spirit. And when he sent his Spirit, we respond by going to tell the world. You see, the Great Commission is possible, and it's a response on our part to God sending his Spirit at Pentecost. And that's how God does things. He initiates and moves in, and then we respond in some way. And that's true with Christmas. It's true with the great Christian mission that he's given us. And I don't think we think about it that way. When I think of the Great Commission, I think of that's something that we're supposed to do, that we're supposed to tackle. We need to get on the stick and go. But no, what if the disciples had gone out before Pentecost? They would have fallen flat. So really, their going out was a response to God sending his Spirit to empower them and fill them. Well, what about that pattern when it comes to living the Christian life? Does that pattern hold true? And I think one of the passages we think about that kind of puts us in gear to get going in our spiritual life is Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13. This is that passage that perhaps a lot of you have memorized about working out your own salvation. Working out your own salvation, like get on the stick and do what you're supposed to do, right? Or is there something more in that verse? If you look at it, it says, work out your own salvation. So it does appear, at least on the outset, that we're to be doing some initiating action here. Work out your own salvation. But the next phrase, with fear and trembling. With fear and trembling. Where else are those words used? Those words are used throughout the Old Testament and in other places in the New Testament when people encountered God. Their response to God's presence when he showed up was fear and trembling. Moses at the burning bush. Mary when the Spirit came upon her. And John in Revelation. Fear and trembling. So we're to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. So our working out is really a response to the fact that God has intervened and has shown us who he is. He's shown up in our life. And so we're really just responding to him. That's how we work out our own salvation, with fear and trembling, because he has made himself known. So it isn't at all our initiating work and our effort. It's us responding to him and his presence in our lives. But if that's not enough, verse 13 makes it completely clear. For it is who works in you? It's God. For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. You see, so much of the Christian faith for us is about our effort. But here, living the Christian life is about our response. We're to respond to God stepping into our lives. And Paul talks in Galatians chapter 3. That's something you can go back and look at. And he says, how did you receive the Spirit? Did you receive the Spirit by doing works or by believing? And the same issue. It's about God's intervening activity in our life and our response to him. Over the summer, the elders had conversations about worship and our expressions of love towards God. And as we talked about worship, and of course music comes into that, and how we live our life comes into that, but how do we express our worship and our expressions of love towards God? And that was the conversation that ensued. And there was question over, like, do we come to worship him or does he do something? And one of the scriptures that came up that we talked about was in Luke chapter 7. It was the account of the immoral woman who came before Jesus and fell at his feet. And as she wept her tears of joy and gratitude and freedom and forgiveness on his feet and wiped them with her hair and anointed his feet, she was responding to God's work in her life. So even our worship and our expressions of love towards God, they start with him and his work in us. When he rescues us, and not just the one rescue when you prayed a prayer to receive Jesus, but all of his rescues, when he rescues us again and again, then we worship and our expressions of love are possible. When Jesus came, he came and recalibrated people's approach to God. And this is what's so unique about the Christian faith. He recalibrated our approach to God. You see, what was the deal with the Pharisees? The Pharisees thought, you know what? We do such good things, right? We do such good things that God will accept us. But on the other side, the sinners thought we do such bad things that God couldn't possibly accept us. And both were wrong for the very same reason. They were looking at their initiative efforts towards God. The religious thought, I'm doing well, and so God will accept me. And the others thought, I'm doing so bad, there's no way he could accept me. And both were wrong. And at the core of it, wrong for the same reason. Because they were placing their focus on their efforts to be able to go to God. I think that's where we as a church need to recalibrate our lives for 2015. Our model often for spiritual growth is so humanistic. We've dressed up our way in good Christian clothes. Our model for spiritual growth is something like this. Our focus is often man-centered, not God-centered, because it's always focused on what I'm doing, rather than what God's doing in me and my response. Its action is based on our effort, not our response. That's what we measure, is our effort, not our response. And its fruit is self-righteousness, not God's glory. Anytime the Bible requires us to act in some way, anytime it pushes us to action, it's not initiative action, it's always responsive action. Anytime you see the Bible command something, it's responsive action, not initiative action. So when you obey, if you obey out of your own efforts, and if you're doing that in your own strength, you are not living the Christian life that Jesus came to teach us. You may have put on the Christian clothes, but it is no different than following the 5 pillars of Islam or any other religious faith that requires your initiative towards God and your effort towards him. That's what's crazy about Jesus and why he was so difficult to understand. Not just because the religious people thought they had conceptions of him, because he was turning the whole system upside down. And it's a system that grades against who we are as human beings in our old nature. Because as people, we want to jump in, we want to be active, we want to be doing. And so it's always based on our efforts. But Jesus had a whole other way. And that's what we need to be calibrated for 2015. Not the focus on our initiating towards God, but our responding to his work in our lives. And we can see this even in the things that, generally speaking, in church settings and in Christian circles, we measure. What are the things we measure? Well, how many of you had 5 quiet times over the past week? Okay, right? How many of you spent some time praying over the past week? So we're measuring quantity. We measure the level of involvement that we have at the church. And so that's kind of our old metrics based on an effort system. And that's usually what we go off of. But what if we had some new metrics? What if we had some new ways of measuring our spiritual lives for 2015? Something that would help calibrate us away from the effort side and move us towards working on the responsive side of our relationship with God. Because all those things we laid out in the scriptures, Christmas, the great Christian mission, living the Christian life, God intervened and we respond. So our metrics should follow that, shouldn't they? We should be looking at more of what's my response to God's action rather than what am I doing for God. So I want to talk about some of those and give a few of those to you. As I have sought to pursue God in that way, to lean more on my response to his movings in me, the thing that has surfaced is my need to grow in awareness of God and his intervening activity in my life. I need to be aware of what he's working on. If I have no idea what he's working on, then how do I know as I go through my daily life what he's using to tap on that area? You see, if I have a sense or an awareness of what God might be pressing on, then when things happen, and I'm in all these kinds of situations we end up in life, I can say, this is what God is doing, and he's using this because my awareness has grown. Well, where do you look to find where God is at work in your life? Where do you look? If you think about it, the place we need to look is in our heart. In other messages throughout this year, we talked about passages like, I'll remove your heart of stone and give you a what? A heart of flesh. I will put my spirit where? In you. So if we're going to try to find God, so to speak, to become aware of God, we've got to look for where he is. And where is he? He lives in you. He's in your heart. So you've got to look there in order to find out what he's doing and what kind of activity is going on in the heart. Now, when we start talking about that, we become a little bit more uncomfortable because it's easy to study our Bible or to read theology books or to do a lot of things. And we can do all those things without becoming more aware of God. We can leave our heart out of the whole equation. But if we are going to move towards metrics that will measure more of our responsiveness to God, then awareness of his activity in our life is vitally important in our spiritual life. So what would that look like? In some simple ways, this is how I guess in a everyday kind of way, began to use the things in my life to help me to hear what God is saying to me. So one of those is, if I'm in a situation that I don't like, that is ripe to find out and to hear what God might be wanting to say to you. So when I'm in a situation I don't like, and God's kind of gracious, and he often listens to my complaining and bickering about the whole thing for some time. But then he's like, okay, can we get over that? It's like, I want to talk about you. Why are you so mad about the situation you're in? Why are you so frustrated about the situation you're in? What's going on in that place? Let me tweak some things there. Because what I see in you is this really quest for control that I'm trying to break out of you. And if we believe he's sovereign, then those circumstances we're in, they're not by happenstance. He's placed us there, and there are things in that place specifically that he wants to use to do something in us. So if you're in a situation that you don't like, ripe for hearing what God might be wanting to do in your heart. And isn't that the kind of work that he wants to do in us? Use those situations. Maybe something like this would work for you. Is there somebody that you don't like? Somebody that you have difficulty with? Somebody that's very hard for you to love? I saw that. Somebody's bumping people next to each other. But you know what? When there's somebody I have trouble loving, I know instantly something's going on with me. Like, why? And then I go through my tirade, but they're like this, and they do this, and they do, and then I get exhausted, and God's like, can we talk now? And then it becomes, why can't I love them? And I begin to see things like, wow, they have the same kind of pride as I do, and it grades on me. I begin to see, you know what? I just don't really want to love them. Like, that's at the bottom of it. I don't like them. I don't want to spend time with them, or I don't want to. But at that level, then, isn't that the kind of work God wants to do? Rewire us to really be able to love well. So use the difficult people in your life to find out what's in your own heart. Sin patterns. Oftentimes we just want to get rid of them, don't we? But because Jesus has forgiven us, right? The penalty's been paid, amen? Right? It's been paid. So you don't have to worry about quitting your sin pattern too quickly. Okay, I'm not saying hang on, but like what I'm saying is if we're always in a rush to get out of it, stop. What if we know we're forgiven, and Lord, what's this about in my life? Like, what's going on here? Why do I do this? Why do I keep going back to this? Why do I keep tripping on this? And as I have done that in my own life, he'll take me back to something. And he'll take me back to something core. And it begins to recalibrate me. And it begins to change me. So use the sins in your life even to become aware of what God's doing in your life. This is a favorite, especially for the men here. Feelings that you don't like. How do you use feelings that you don't like to find God and to hear from God? I think a lot of times things percolate and stir up within us. Good coffee metaphor there, percolate. Things stir up within us, and we don't like those feelings. Somebody says something to us, and it kind of stings, but we just brush it off. All kinds of feelings can stir within us, and we shove them away. But what if we said, well, why am I feeling that way? What's going on in my heart with that? And it's interesting, and I see this again and again as God is pressing in on people's lives, they begin to have feelings that they don't like, and they start welling up, and they can't control them anymore. Because God's using the everyday things of our life, like our feelings, to get us to take a look and say, Lord, why? What's going on with that? And that can lead you into hearing his voice and knowing exactly where he's working in your life. I think it's a much better question to ask somebody. How's your awareness of God? What's he doing right now? I think that's a better measure of our spiritual health than is how many quiet times did you have? Those other metrics serve the new ones. They're servants to the new ones. Well, another thing I think that would help us on this journey is growth in seeking God's intervention, not our own solutions. Growth in seeking God's intervention, not our own solutions. Now, when it comes to things you know are impossible, right, you'll probably bow your knee and say, God, that this is just, it's beyond your capacity to even conceive of it. So you might go to him. But most of life is not lived in that category. Most of life is lived in the, I don't think this is possible, but maybe, or the, I think I can handle this, so I'm going to just do it. But what if we moved towards seeking God's intervention into our lives? Not trying in our own efforts so much to make things happen. What if we got to the place where we just said, you know what, I've got nothing, I just have to seek him. That's a great place to be. And I wonder if the way we measured that was how quick, like between now and the end of the year, how quickly do you get to the place where something comes up and you seek his intervention? So maybe you would have spent a month spinning your wheels on something until you broke and sought his intervention. What if that changed and became 2 weeks or a week or a few days where you spun your wheels and you thought, you know what? The reason I'm going crazy is because I haven't just sat with him and asked him to intervene in this situation. That'd be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? I think Hillside would be a much different place if we sought God's intervention and his activity and movement first. Because God loves to save. He loves to deliver. And he will intervene if we but come to him and ask him to do so. Well, this last one that I want to give you is particularly, I guess, kind of more personal for me, of some things that this wouldn't have been on my radar 10 years ago in terms of measuring the Christian life. And this one is about receiving love in vulnerability. Receiving love in vulnerability. Over the past few months, as Pastor Chuck was preaching in Ephesians, it brought back a passage that I had spent a lot of time on about God's love in Ephesians chapter 3. And God had me, I was kind of stuck in that text for a while as God stirred in me about his love. And then throughout that time, I was watching people experience God's overwhelming love. I'd meet with somebody and, they would allow themselves to break a bit. And every single time that happened, it was like God was right there. And he backed up his dump truck of love and poured it out all over them. And I kept seeing that. And I thought, I kind of got a little jealous. I'm like, I want to know God's love like that. And then God just whispered, he's like, psst, you can. If you choose to be broken like that. If you choose to receive my love in a place of real vulnerability, you too can have that. And I've been reading this book called Surrender to Love. I want to read a short excerpt out of it for you. It's a book by David Benner. He's a psychologist and spiritual formation teacher at a seminary. And he says this: the single most important thing I have learned in over 30 years of study of how love produces healing is that love is transformational only when it is received in vulnerability. Suppose that with God's help I am able to love my son unconditionally. But if he is desperately trying to please me, the unconditional nature of my love will not even be noticed. And there will be no deep experience of knowing himself deeply and unconditionally loved. Receiving love, while he is trying to earn it, will only reinforce his efforts to be lovable. Far from being transformational, this will only increase his efforts to earn love. And any love he receives will only be experienced as the fruit of these efforts. Daring to accept myself and receive love for who I am in my nakedness and vulnerability is the indispensable precondition for genuine transformation. But make no mistake about just how difficult this is. Everything within me wants to show my best pretend self to both other people and to God. This is my false self, the self of my own making. And this self can never be transformed because it is never willing to receive love in vulnerability. When this pretend self receives love, it simply becomes stronger, and I am even more deeply in bondage to my false way of living. And so one of my new metrics has been, how vulnerable am I willing to be to receive the love of other people and God in my life? I would never have thought that would have been a metric to measure how spiritual of a person I am. But as I saw in Ephesians 3, the essential place of God's love and how to receive it, and watching people break and God just shows up like wham and shares his love with them, it became something that I thought, this needs to be on my radar. And so I wrote a prayer after some of this, and it was just a simple prayer, and I said, as probably you might, I'm pretty scared of vulnerability. I'm not sure how to move forward into this with my wife, with my close friends. Help me. I know I could never pull it off, even if I wanted to. Help me to say yes when the moment comes and an offer in front of me to be vulnerable and to receive love is there. Receiving God's love and the love of other people in our vulnerable moments is deeply transformational and will change us. I think those three things, I'm sure there's others, that changes the metrics considerably. If you think, wow, like this is kind of stirring something for me, some follow-up things, come to Open Space. We're going to work through this in a bit more detailed way at Open Space on Wednesday. Center's leading a class on sensible shoes at 9:30. It's a book about the stories of these four ladies' lives. It uses all of these new metrics as it sifts through their life. And so there are ways. On the Wednesdays of Open Space, there's a ladies' prayer group. It's based off of these kind of metrics. What if, at the end of the year, we recalibrated to this? I think we would be a more loving people. I think we'd be a more holy people. I think we'd actually find that sins in our life are falling away, and the power of them and their grip on us is fading. Will you let God's Spirit recalibrate you? The worship team could come back up. If you would close your eyes for just a minute, please don't fall asleep if you're not already. A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So I want to leave you with a picture. As your eyes are closed, picture yourself in water. And you're thrashing about, and you're treading water, keeping your head afloat, trying to swim around. You move to this place in the water or that, and you're propelling yourself through the water. And you're getting very tired. You actually get so tired, and you know you can't keep it up. You can't swim to this place or that anymore. You can't tread water anymore. And you heard somewhere that if I don't move at all, I'll float. And so you stop moving. And lo and behold, you're suspended in the water. You're floating. And all that effort and energy, you're floating. But there's something else you notice as you're just floating there. There's a current in the water. And it's taking you exactly where you need to go. But you had no idea. You had no idea that there was even a current because you were so busy treading water and swimming from place to place. That's the picture of today's message. That's the picture of the Scriptures. That's the picture that we want to recalibrate our lives to float and let His current, His initiating action in our lives take us where He wants us to go. And our sole focus is responding